It makes sense now. He exists beyond creation, he cannot enter it without destroying it, the intangible state. He's been ejected into the void. Considering the position we are settled in within the universe, if his spiritual embodiment was depleted to not be capable of maintaining stability, then he slipped into the wormhole of the Bermuda Triangle/Devil's Seas and was pulled into the Great Attractor, where his spirit was catapulted at extreme speeds, stripping his essence of every fused particle, returning him to a state of non-existence in the void beyond time and space's boundaries, somewhere before the beginning of time itself, into the Soul Forge. This is the inevitable destination's true form and modern translation of where we go when all earthly attachments have been let go. They're the raw energy particle, stripped clean of every fused piece of matter that makes us the emotion drawn and manifested persona, which is at the core of each of our souls, is stripped bare and infused with new energies. However, it does so by the raw particles of the soul's design and reforms itself by that design template. That is why we have past life memories, because though we are renewed with all new photon energies and level, the imprinted design is still there. When our life force resonates at those core designed patterns, we experience the residual memories within that structure. I have to go in and get him out. Not just because I am an angel, not just because he is my king, but because he truly is not my enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
We know that there is a certain relationship between the plan of the architect and the working out of his ideas in wood and iron and mortar. Now, in precisely the same sense, humanity is incomplete. It is still in the process of its evolutionary creation. Thus we can account for the imperfections in that which is essentially divine, for the mingled wisdom and ignorance, for the injustice and cruelty, for the happiness and the sorrow, for the successes and the failures. Chapter 7, Why do we not remember? The fact that we do not remember is in perfect harmony with the principles of evolution. The very nature of the evolutionary work to be done by reincarnation necessitates a lot of memory. One useful purpose of the expression of consciousness through a physical body is that it narrows its scope and thereby increases its efficiency. The cognition of the ego embraces a vast field, and includes past lives, but the limitation of matter which compels consciousness to be expressed through a physical body, focuses the attention on the evolutionary work immediately in hand. The brain becomes the instrument of consciousness, but also, fortunately, its limitation. If there were not loss of memory, our minds would now range over the adventures of thousands of years in the past. It would encompass a vast drama with countless loves and hates, of many lives filled with pathos and tragedy. To thus distract the mind from the present life would retard our progress. When one is alone and in a secluded place, one can think better and accomplish more than when in the midst of turbulent scenes and throngs of people. When there is less to think about, the thinking is more effective. It is necessary to restrict the consciousness and limit the mind to the present life in order to get the most satisfactory results. The same truth is embodied in that old saying that whoever is jack of all trades is master of none. Concentration is necessary for progress. If we would master the lessons of this life, we must not take other lives within the field of perception. The very process of reincarnation is a coming out of the general into the particular. We should keep in mind the fact that our true and permanent life is in the causal body, and on the mental plane, and that there, alone, is unbroken memory possible, until we have reached a rather high point in evolution. The descent into matter in each incarnation is also beyond reach of the brain memory, of course. The brain, being a limitation of consciousness, is therefore a limitation of memory, as certainly as a mountain range is a limitation of sight. Memory is dependent on things not within the control of the will. It often fails to establish facts which we wish to recall. We know, for example, the name of a certain person. There is no doubt that we know it, and yet it is impossible to remember it at will. Tomorrow it will flash upon us, but we cannot remember it now, try as we may. If memory fails to produce its complete record even when we have a mental picture of just how that person looks, and know just where we have met him, it is certainly not remarkable that with no such immediate connection with our last incarnation we fail to recall it. Our failure to remember a name we heard only a few hours ago is not because there is no inner record of it, for if there were no record there, we should never be able to recall it. Just as the failure to remember now what recently occurred does not prove that there is no record of the incident, so the failure to remember a former life does not prove that the record of our past incarnations is not within the imperishable causal body. The memory of past lives is in the spirit while the memories of this life is in the mind. It might seem on first thought that one who has been a carpenter in previous incarnations should have no need to learn the name and use of a saw, or one who has been a skillful penman to learn slowly to hold the pen and fashion the letters, but we must remember that the old soul is now breaking in a new physical instrument with which to express itself, and that while it will be able to use all the skill it has previously evolved, its full expression must await the time when the new vehicle has been brought into responsive action. Let us imagine also that the characters on the machine are in a foreign language which must be mastered before it can be used. Still, the difficulties are not great enough for a fair illustration. We must also suppose that it is a living thing, with moods and emotions, and that it must pass through stages of growth comparable to infancy and youth. Under these handicaps it would be certain that the stenographer would appear to have very little knowledge and to possess little skill. Yet as a matter of fact it is merely the conditions that temporarily prevent him from expressing his skill. The gist of experience gained in the past represents skill that has no dependence whatever upon brain memory. If a man should suffer a lapse of memory, as sometimes happens, and wander about unable to give his name or place of residence, such loss of memory does not prevent him using any skill he may have evolved. If he is an athlete he may not know in what gymnasium he evolved his great strength, but he can use it just as effectively regardless of the absence of memory. One who has been a skillful penman brings all his skill to the new incarnation, but of course the new body must be trained to hold the pen and form the letters. Every teacher knows that one child will quickly learn that, and soon become a competent penman, while another can by no possibility exhibit skill in that particular art. The reason is that one has previously evolved his skill and the other has not, and may not, for several more incarnations. It is not only clear that the failure to remember the past has nothing to do with our ability to use the skill and wisdom we have previously evolved, but it is equally obvious that it is the best of good fortune that we cannot remember the past. If we could do so, that memory would keep alive the personal antagonisms of past incarnations. Nobody will deny that we have plenty of them in this incarnation, or that the world would be the better if we could bury some of the present enmities in blank oblivion. If all quarreling neighbors were to suddenly lose memory of their feuds, it would be an undeniable advantage to everybody concerned. There is undoubtedly some necessary recapitulation in the early part of the incarnation, just as there may be in the early part of a school term. But in the main we are thrown into new conditions which are calculated to develop additional faculties. Veiled in dense matter, not much of the ego's consciousness can reach it. The relationship between the ego and the personality may be illustrated by that which exists between the brain consciousness and that of the fingertip. The difference, of course, is great. The fingertip cannot see or hear or taste or smell. It is limited to one sense, touch. But it is a form of consciousness, and it can get experience and pass it on to the brain consciousness. A man may be talking to others and see some substance on the table beside him. It may be sand or salt. Without interrupting his conversation he can put down his finger and get at the truth about the matter. The fingertip gets the information and passes it on to the brain consciousness. Meantime there has been no pause in the discourse. Not a phrase nor a word nor the shading of a thought has been missed. The intellectual life went on in its completeness while the ray of intelligence sent down in the fingertip got and reported the fact as it was. Just so the life of the ego, the true self of each of us, goes forward on its home plane while the personality here gropes for its harvest of experience. Some of those experiences will be painful to the personality, and the event will. Chapter 8, Vicarious Atonement. The sacrifice consists of limiting himself in the matter of manifested worlds, and it is reflected in the sacrifice of the Christ and other great teachers. Nobody more than the Theosophist pays to the Christ the tribute of the most reverent gratitude, but he also holds with St. Paul that each must work out his own salvation. Were it not for such sacrifice the race would be very, very far below its present evolutionary level. The help that such great spiritual beings have given mankind is incalculable and is undoubtedly altogether beyond what we are able to comprehend. But to assume that such sacrifices relieve man from the necessity of developing his spiritual nature or in any degree nullify his personal responsibility for any evil he has done, is false and dangerous doctrine. We hear of a lingering practice in a remote province of China, whereby a man convicted of a crime is permitted to hire a substitute to suffer the penalty in his stead. The law must have its victim and its supremacy must be upheld. We laugh at that and know well enough that punishing the unfortunate substitute, who sacrifices himself to obtain a sum of money that will provide for his family, cannot regenerate the offender. Indeed, we see clearly that his willingness to shift the responsibility for his crime upon another only sinks him farther into iniquity. Let us suppose that that system of vicarious atonement for wrongdoing were to be adopted generally. Then every murderer who had the means would escape the consequences of his crime. Every burglar who was successful enough to have the cash on hand could elude prison. Every pickpocket could hire a substitute to go to jail for him and thus continue his criminal career. Every embezzler would have the money to purchase freedom. Every successful thief could laugh at the law. It would make a mockery of justice. It would place a premium upon crime. However bad the dishonest might be, it would make them worse. It would destroy the sense of personal responsibility, and personal responsibility is the basis of sound morals and the foundation of civilized society. Special salvation, the teaching that we are not responsible for our sins and that by believing that another assumed them and died for us we can escape the results of our wrongdoing and thus be saved.